Okay, let's get into this. Just a quick heads up. The bottom line is that I am extremely sick. So the main point of this video, I'm going to be trying to do this video quickly before I sneeze or do something horrible, is that at the end of the day, the Democrats and the Supreme Court look like they are going to be having a side plan to sabotage. Although, of course, the Supreme Court views it as ruling based on law and the Constitution, but to sabotage this $2,000 tariff, you could call it a stimulus, you could call it a refund, you could call it whatever you want. But the bottom line is that there is a major problem here where it looks like the Democrats and the Supreme Court are working together to potentially, ultimately, at the end of the day, have a negative impact where it just won't be paid. Now, let's go through some of the basics real quick. As you know, Trump continues to come out with statements related to essentially, paying a $2,000 amount to the lower income and moderate income individuals for this $2,000 tariff-related stimulus. You can call it whatever it is. A stimulus can mean many things. Now, this is important because there's this case, and the case is called Trump v. VOS Selections, Inc. And what happened is in that case, because it went to the Supreme Court, is that there's this law called the IEEPA, a 1977 law during the Nixon time that basically limited the president's power to do certain things. And, essentially they look to whether or not the president can do stuff based on an emergency, urgent situation. And under this, right, it doesn't really talk about tariffs, but Trump is using it as a means and ways to go ahead and, grab this power to negotiate with these other countries using tariffs as like the big bad stick. Because if they don't give Trump what he wants, right, with this big bad negotiation stick, then he's going to hit them with worse and worse and worse tariffs. You see him do it over and over, especially with his online accounts. Now, as a result of this 1977 case, we have the new case, Trump v. VOS, at the Supreme Court, where they have not made a ruling yet. So just so you know, just some of the background details with it. Okay, so the Supreme Court granted certiorari, and so that means they certified to review it in September of 2025. They put it on an expedited basis and heard oral arguments on it in November 5th of 2025. Now, November 5th was actually a little bit of a while ago because now we're on the 18th. Now, just to make sure you understand something with this whole situation, if they rule that his tariff negotiations are unconstitutional, then it will collapse the government's ability to not only pay you the $2,000, but it will also collapse the government's ability to do a lot of payments going forward because they will owe back literally billions upon billions of dollars. So let me give you an example. The Supreme Court hasn't ruled on it yet, but just assuming that in January of 2026, again, January of 2026, that basically, in this particular situation, let's say the Supreme Court rules that the tariffs are unconstitutional. Well, here's the deal. If we were looking at this thing and they decided around basically the end of, let's say January 2026, January 1st, Trump would then owe back, and nobody knows how it actually happened. Nobody knows how it all come down, right? Trump would owe back $120 to $140 billion. I guess some would have to go to these other countries. Some would have to go to, basically these different situations. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is, he would owe back a massive, massive, unruly, ridiculous amount. So at the end of the day, the whole problem here is, just to be very clear, this is one of those things where, just to be very, very clear, it's just one of those situations. To be fair, Trump is not going to be able to do that. And now a lot of you on the Democrat side, just to be very clear, fully or anti-tariff negotiations with other countries. Many on the left, the super Democrat side, which is really just the Democrat side, feel that essentially these are bullying tactics. It loses our high moral standing, our high moral ground. I would just proffer to those people on the woke side that, Biden, who was verbally against the tariffs, fully used throughout his entire presidency the first term tariffs put in Trump. And so just to be very clear about this, you can say that, but it would be extremely hyper, just obnoxiously egotistical and, it would be wrong. It would be wrong if somebody were to argue that on the left side at this point because Biden utilized them even though he didn't support them. You know what I mean? Actions speak louder than words kind of gig. So at the end of the day, it would irk me if somebody made that argument on the left. Now, on the right side, the right, the Republicans, keep in mind, I'm a person in the middle with my political status. The people on the right side, they're arguing, yeah, we need a big bad stick to make these other countries come along, and these other countries to go ahead and basically, bend to the will of the United States to buy US dollars, use the reserve currency of the US dollar, and help the United States succeed with what it has become, which is basically like the police force of the world, right? We have all the people on the red lightsaber side and the blue lightsaber side, and these are your two competing factions. So just to be clear, if the United States Supreme Court were to go ahead and say this is unconstitutional, probably around 120 to 140 billion dollars would essentially be due back largely to these other countries, which the United States, you saw it fighting over basically $9 billion and its inability to find money to do it. Obviously, it has billions, but that would be a massive, massive hit to the United States. Now, why are the Democrats pushing for this sort of outcome where it'll be ruled that the president of the United States does not have the ability to do taxation with external groups, right, nations? Why are the Democrats saying the president should not be allowed to do this? Well, at the end of the day, they know it will collapse President Trump's ability to basically, build up the nation, pay off the debt, give a $2,000 stimulus. It will completely destroy his ability to do those functions. And in order to ruin Trump, you have to do a couple of things. Number one, you have to have a scandal. Number two, you have to have some other force that's like, driving everybody into a frenzy, whether it's COVID or something else. Number three, you have to have him fail on the top-notch items, right? Building the wall, right? $2,000 stimulus, right? Financial security of the American people, being able to afford groceries, affordability. You have to have him fail on those particular items to have him basically lose as President Trump, as his administration. So as a result of that, what you end up with is it's a poison pill. Now, this is not uncommon for what we saw during the shutdown, right? The Democrats are willing to basically say, you either give us Obama-era subsidies for people and their health insurance, and then all these payments for emergency rooms and rural clinics where, everybody uses them, including illegal immigrants, or we are not going to reopen the government. And they were totally fine with a poison pill, doctrinal approach. That's how they were going to do it. Same gig with this. It is the same doctrinal approach of destroy the country while Trump is in, ergo, Democrats will look better, ergo, Democrats will have a better time at the halftime show, which is, as you know, where they're going to vote in different senators and House reps, during this, very important upcoming election. Now, here's the thing that you have to keep in mind. Let's play what if. If the Supreme Court went and ruled, just to be clear, that this thing was unconstitutional, right? Then at that point, Trump would immediately need Congress to pass a bill to give him that power. Because remember, the Supreme Court can rule something like that, but then Congress can wiggle waggle and go a little bit different direction with it and pass something that gives Trump, under certain circumstances, the power he needs. And then, a new lawsuit can open up and he can go through the whole thing again. If he were to do that, though, there's some particular problems. The problems that you run into is that for Congress, which is mostly controlled by Republicans, to go ahead and pass this bill to protect Trump's, ability to basically tax these other nations and do these negotiations, you would need, in order to pass the bill, around 200, simple majority, 218 of 435 voting members, which the Republicans, as long as they voted directly down the lines, that would work. They would have enough. They should be able to get it through. If you have anybody going left or right, when they shouldn't be because of their party lines, or they're going to do whatever they're going to want to do. But if that happens, then they have a problem. Now, the Senate, you would need a simple majority. So basically, 51 of 100 votes, kind of gig, or 50 plus the vice president's tiebreaker. That would get some sort of rule through. Now, however, if, for example, in that bill, which then limits the president's power, if the Supreme Court ruled on this and said, no, there's not going to be any $2,000 stimulus, no, the president can't negotiate with tariffs like this. If they came out in the House and the Senate with a bipartisan, both sides of the aisle are on board with this bill, but the bill in some way limited the president's power, even more so than what the Supreme Court, basically stated, then the president is not going to like it. In that instance, you would then have a different situation. Passing the bill would not be a simple majority passage. It would go to the president. He wouldn't sign it. It would get denied. It would have to go back to the House. And in that situation, you would need essentially what's called an override veto. And the override veto would require for the House 2/3 of the members present and voting, which, you're talking about at least 290 people of the 435 all present. And then the Senate, you would need 2/3 of the members present and voting, typically at least 67 of the 100, if all of them are present. So the point is, if they try to limit the president's power with a congressional vote on something about his ability to go ahead and negotiate the tariffs with these other nations, I can guarantee you Trump is likely to go ahead and veto that. They will then need 2/3 to go ahead and get it through without him. So this supermajority veto override is what would likely result from that situation. Now, keeping all of this in mind, there is something you need to know. Not all of the tariffs that he has been negotiating, that he has been doing, are at issue, are at stake. Some are under different laws, such as Section 232 for national security on steel, aluminum, autos, certain types of raw materials that we need, etc., etc. Section 301 for unfair trade practices are also unaffected. So, 232, 301, those types of tariffs, they'll be fine. However, just to be clear, Trump administration is stating that if the Supreme Court rules that he doesn't have the capacity to do these negotiations, with these other countries for these tariffs, then at the end of the day, just to be very clear on this, the bottom line is he has other types of laws, other types of legal arguments that he's going to make as a backup to the IEEPA. So just to be very clear about the structure of this, you have two groups that are very powerful that are trying to kill off the $2,000 stimulus in a legal sense. And I know a lot of you are like, well, that's impossible. Trump's the president and blah, 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 blah. No. It's not hard for them to end any potential of a $2,000 stimulus. And a lot of the Republicans, they're part of the Republican Party, are saying, don't pay out $2,000 stimulus payments because, basically you're then bolstering not only the Republicans, but the Democrats. They're saying, hey, pay down basically the debt that we have that just seems to be growing and growing and growing at an obnoxious rate each and every year. The truth of this problem is the following. We, even with this tariff money, can't actually pay off our debt that we owe because, we're at $38 trillion. So we can't afford to pay back the principal, right? The amount that was like the total amount. We can't afford to pay the monthly, the 3-month, the 4-month, the 6-month interest that comes from these, right? When you have to pay them. And then, if the credit card bill comes, you got to pay it. So the point is, we don't have the money to pay the interest on top of it as well. So what they're saying is, screw the American people, just pay all that money to get essentially this debt down. Now, here's what you need to understand about the politics of how things are going forward when it comes to this $2,000 stimulus. America is technically a bankrupt country. It's bankrupt because the amount of money it owes is far beyond its capacity to repay it back, or even in its current state, its capacity to pay it back from future investments. Now, as a result of that, that means that America is not in a good place. America is in kind of a shitty place right now. America, if it just continued to, as to what the Democrats are saying, raise the spending limit and say, F it, who's going to do anything about it? There's a problem with that. AI enables massive amounts of futuristic achievements in an extremely short period of time. As you know, back in the day, we had to rely originally on human intelligence and the tools that we can create to create scientific achievements, right? So it started out as human intelligence, then went to human intelligence plus tools, then went to human intelligence plus tools, plus basically computers, then went to human intelligence plus tools plus computers to basically, artificial intelligence. Now that we have artificial intelligence, something with an IQ far beyond the capacity of the smartest, brightest humans, the kicker is we now have these, quantum computers that can do massive, massive amounts of calculations. I mean, they can literally within seconds assess and go through every bit of information the human race has ever created that is stored on the internet. So you have to understand the computers now and the artificial intelligence are going to massively ramp up our ability to achieve, futuristic technologies relatively quickly. This means that new types of horrible, scary, terrible destruction machines, end of the world machines, can be created by countries that are doing a lot with artificial intelligence. And that will then basically figure out, how they can create this thing to threaten other nations with. Let me give you an example. A lot of people basically, at the end of the day, just to be clear on this thing, thought that we would never really be able to figure out what the DNA code was, have it all, basically figured out what each code, what each bit, what each piece means on the spiral helix. Using AI computers, we were able to go ahead and figure it out in totality, which helps us with this, thing called CRISPR, to go ahead and cure cancer, cure AIDS, cure all kinds of things. And so we now have that as a result of AI running algorithms to figure out potential options that would outcome for things where you put cells together, right? You have proteins, cells, all that stuff comes together and it makes something that works. Okay. The building blocks of life are not, you can't just take anything and do this. It has to actually structurally work as two DNA strands that'll come together. So the point is, that is the result of quantum computing and artificial intelligence. Now, at the same time, you can apply that same technology to super weaponry systems, which means that small countries can have new futuristic super weapons that are far scarier than what we consider to be the ultra super weapon, which is, of course, nukes. So at the end of the day, you have to understand something's going on here. And that is where the United States might not always be the definitive absolute superpower. We know that China, in many respects, has already surpassed America when it comes to a lot of its military capabilities. It is surpassing America in space-related capabilities. At the end of the day, we're a culture that is not producing scientists, nor are we a culture that is producing hyper new modern weapons. It seems like what we have is what we've got, and we're not moving the ball forward fast enough. We're not using the CERN technology fast enough. We're not using international space technology achievements fast enough. We're just not getting ahead of the curve to have new super whatever technologies that are needed to scare other nations away. China is. So to be fair with this whole situation, we have 38 trillion in debt, and nobody's going to say shit about it because, we have a massive military. But that military is going to lose its capacity to have that scare factor worth, because as we get closer and closer to other countries having big, bad technologies that can stop our classic 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s military weaponry, we basically get to the point where, we have a giant ship with a lot of, super jets on it. Yeah, that's cool. But that's not going to be very helpful against a society that creates a million drones that have the capacity to go through metal. They have the capacity to fly faster than F-35, have the capacity to do all kinds of things. So just to be very clear about the situation, we need to worry about this, because ultimately, when other nations have the capacity to threaten America's ability to be the ultimate police force of the world, other countries are going to lose faith in us very quickly. And if we have massive debt due and we have to pay off this, that credit card bill every month, we're not going to be placed well. We're going to be in a very, very bad position. So I understand what the Republicans are saying. We need to put all the money towards, paying down the debt, but there's not enough money. Even with these tariffs, there's just not enough money to do it. So with that said, we've now covered what the Democrats are doing, what the Supreme Court is doing, what the Republicans are doing, and all the potential issues that are here. I am super sick and I have to go into a meeting at 2. So what I'm going to say is this: I will try to catch up with you a little bit later today. Later tonight, I'm going to be too sick. And tomorrow I will not be going to the homeless center to work with the homeless because I'm super sick. And I think I got this from the homeless facility basically last week on Wednesday. But with that said, please remember to like, please remember to subscribe. And also, please, if you have Medicare questions, give Chapter a call at 339-226-6287, askchapter.org/disability. Give them a call. I'll catch you all a little bit later. You have a wonderful, wonderful day, and we will rock and roll from there. Thank you so much, and have fun. All right, bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.